Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Sales Olympics day. I think it's 15 guns. Joel guns. Today we have a spicy topic. I want to see who's out there, who's out, who's alive. It's Friday morning. Good morning, Mari. How you doing? Bonjour, mon ami. It's too early or too late for French. It's always the right time for French, Robert. So welcome everyone who's watching to day 15. Bienvenue à la Jeux Olympiques du Monde. Today we have a really spicy topic. Hi, Kirsten. How's it going? Happy joyeux vendredi à tous. Happy Friday to everyone. So we have a spicy topic today. The topic is going to be how to challenge. So this has been a big topic that's been among the community of when I have something that I believe. Buongiorno, Gianluca. He's probably like, please don't say that again. When I have something that I believe that the prospect is either incorrect on, or I want to challenge them in terms of the way that they're thinking, how do I do it? And how do I do it in a way that essentially gets them to, to open up, to think in a certain way, to change the conversation and change the conversation to one that's more relevant about what is going on in their current state. So why don't we jump in to lap number 1, tour numéro 1. What the buyer believes. Okay, so there's 4 steps to this. The punchline is, if you're to challenge outright from a psychological view, and Robert Keegan goes into this really deeply in his book, The Evolving Self. Yeah, Kirsten nailed it. Is this how to call your baby ugly without saying it? Sort of. It's how to correct someone, essentially, when they believe something that's not completely correct. So from the psychological perspective, you essentially have 5 selves. The first self is you become aware of that you exist. So you'll see babies anywhere from 0 to the age of 6 sticking their tongue out. And they're like, oh, okay, I exist. And they're aware that they exist. The second self that you get to, and Robert Keegan basically poses that most people only get to the third self within their lifetime. Some people get to the 4th and very few get to the 5th self from a psychological and maturity perspective, but I digress. Point being, the second self, you become aware that others exist. So this starts with your parents, and for the first half of the self, if you will, from 6 to 9 years old, you want to win favor with the same-sexed parent. And then at 9, you see an interesting flip. And they want to win favor with the opposite sex parent, and they want to war against the same sex parent. And then you see an interesting flip again at around 13 to where they want war on both. Right? So the third self, and I'll let it peter off after that. The third self is you become aware that different groups exist, basically, that it's not just your family, that there are other families in the community. There are different cohorts in terms of, maybe you joined a gym, or you joined, a certain soccer team or some kind of sport, and you become aware that there's other interdependent groups. But the point is, if you're in the second self, then you can, from a maturity perspective, be no older than 16 years old. Usually you're somewhere within the range of 6 to 16. And this is where challenging comes into play from a psych view. So when you enter into this child ego state, essentially what Robert Keegan posits in his book is when you start to war against your family members, or you start to war against your parents, or you start to war against anyone, and you're trying to challenge them or correct them or bring out mistakes, essentially they're going to double down into parent ego state, and they're going to dig their heels in. And essentially their answer, regardless of what you come up with, is going to be no. So you're going to see kind of some tension enter into the relationship. So when I diagnose something and I find out something that the buyer believes it's not true, or the buyer doesn't know that exists, if I go about it in the wrong way, in the wrong manner of just telling them, what they believe it's not true, or telling them essentially that they're, they're wrong in a certain facet, or telling them that something exists, from a psych view, they're going to start to redact. They're going to start to rebel. So I have a 4-step process for you that was how my sister went about it. Absolutely blew my mind. So I thought I had stomach ulcers. I go home and I'm like, to Texas, and I'm like, hey, Mandy, my sister's an ER doctor. I was like, I have stomach ulcers because of stress. So I want to know what I should do about it. What kind of medication should I buy? Should I buy Prilosec? Should I buy Tums? How do I solve this? So she starts asking me a number of questions. And she said, the first step that she went through, she said, well, why do you believe that you have stomach ulcers? Why do you think it's stomach ulcers? I'm like, oh, well, and I start to go into my reasoning. Well, I had stomach ulcers when I was back in college. You know, my stress level was really high then because I was taking my LSAT, and I had a major and a minor and a full-time job. I was working at a court. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I was working in municipal court. And when I had all those jobs, essentially, I got stomach ulcers at that point. So it's really sharp pain all of a sudden, blinding pain, transitions to different parts of my stomach. And then after about 5 minutes, it stops. And then it starts to happen whenever I eat food or if I try to drink caffeine. And so she goes, okay, so why do you think that it's stress? Why do you think that it's that's the cause of it? And I said, well, my workload has been a little bit more intense lately, and so I've been working some extra hours. And so I'm almost positive that that's what it is. So the second step that she goes into, she goes, okay. And she goes into a second step of she's trying to figure out for herself what it is. She said, are you still drinking a lot of caffeine? I said, yes, I am. She goes, how much caffeine are you drinking in a day? Are you still drinking Americano in the morning? And I said, yes, I am. She said, are you still drinking a Diet Monster every day for lunch? I said, yes, I am. She said, are you still drinking a Diet Coke every single night after you come home back for your run? I said, yes, I am. So that's the second step. She diagnosed what she thought that it was. The third step that she goes into is she says, she essentially blows up the fact that supported my belief. She said, interesting. Do you know that there are no medical studies that actually link stress to stomach ulcers? So she blew up the fact that supported my belief of my diagnosis. And then the fourth step is I corrected myself. I said, oh, it's got to be the caffeine. She goes, I think that it's the caffeine. And sure enough, it was. So that was we're going to use that as a baseline, that story, for how you can get people essentially to correct themselves using your expert diagnosis. So the first piece of that is you want to figure out basically what your buyers believe and why they believe it. So what do they believe in terms of the business problem? What do they believe in terms of the tactical problem? What do they believe in terms of the root cause? And most importantly, what is the fact that supports that belief? Why do they believe that that is the root cause? That is the business problem, or that is the tactical problem? I'm going to get dinged. Sounds familiar. Sounds familiar as in I do that often, or sounds familiar as in you do that often? I think that's Federico. Hey, this isn't caffeine, but I have about 3 caffeinated beverages on my desk right now. Full disclosure, I went straight back to the caffeine. So that's the punchline of the story. So let's go into lap 2. Lap 2, so that first lap, we kind of spent a lot of time going into the story. So the first lap is I am figuring out what they believe. What do they believe is the root cause? What do they believe is the business problem? What do they believe is the tactical problem? And they're going to lead and they're going to lead in a certain amount of ways. Like they might come in and they might start with a prescription. I think that I need cold email sales training. I'm like, got it. Can you walk me through a little bit how you're cold outbounding today? Would be next question that I would ask. So you need to figure out in that first step a number of different things, but you essentially need to figure out what is their self-diagnosis and what is the fact that supports that self-diagnosis. So if they said, I think that I need cold email sales training, let's see if y'all can jump into the chat. I know that they need cold email sales training at that point, but what do I not know at that point? They come in and they're like, hey, so someone passed me your name. I really think that I need cold email sales training for my team. I know that they want cold email sales training, but what do I not know at that point? Kirsten, Raja, Gianluca, what do I not know at that point? So they come riling in. That's their self-prescription, is that they think that they need, to focus around sales engagement or the different emails that their team is writing. And they often people lead in that way. They come to deck with their self-prescription. So this is brilliant. Yeah, you don't know why they think that. Brilliant, Kirsten. You don't know why they think that. So they might think they need cold email sales training because they think their email sucks because they've looked at their email and they don't like how long it's written. They might think that because the VP of sales, put their head in and was like, this email is trash. You don't know if their open rate is super low in their head. You don't know if their reply rate is super low in their head. You don't know if if it's low overall. You don't know the actual amount of open rate. You don't know the actual amount of reply rate. You don't know how many team members are being affected by this. You don't know what their quota is. You don't know where they are towards quota. You don't know what you essentially don't know anything except for they think that they have self-prescribed that they believe that they need cold email sales training. So I'm always after step one. So step one is finding out and they might not have all of this criteria. They might think they know the root cause. They might have self-diagnosed the impact. They might have self-diagnosed what they believe the tactical problem is. Well, our open rate's really low. Maybe they have just self-diagnosed the root cause and the business problem. But most importantly, I need to figure out which of these components do they believe, and what is the fact that supports that belief. So if they say, well, my cold emails are trash, that's why I need cold email sales training, I'll usually go into them like, why do you say that? I'm sure they're not that bad. Why do you say that, if you don't mind me asking? They'll say, well, every single time that I poke my head in, to one of the cold emails that my reps have sent, we sent around 75 emails per day. And every single time that I take a look at one of the emails that they're sending, it's just really, really bad. It's insufferable whenever I look at it. I'm like, well, what do you mean by insufferable? Is it too long? Sometimes I'll give a couple of options just to get them to open up a little bit. Because you have to keep in mind, they're not positive that you're an expert first. Like, they're not positive that you know what the options should be, right? So sometimes I'll give them a couple options. I'm like, do you mean that it's too long? Do you mean that there are too many pattern words? Do you mean that they don't know their buyer? And then they'll cut in. So you're teasing out the self-diagnosis information. So self-diagnosis information is actually really valuable. It's really valuable for a couple of reasons. I'd say number one, because you want to know what they want, the driving impact that they're trying to avoid by solving the master problem. That's the only thing that they can't be wrong about, that they want to avoid this impact. Now, they can be wrong that that impact is avoidable. They can be wrong that that's the business problem that you should be solving to avoid it. They can be wrong that that's the right root cause, tactical problem, that there aren't other root causes or business problems or tactical problems or current impacts will happen because of it, or current event triggers that make it more worth solving today than they are without, or future event triggers that make it more important to solve for it today so they don't run into the impact in the future. They can be wrong about all of that. And they also can be wrong that it's standalone, that that's the only one that exists. But the only thing that they're not wrong about is they want to avoid a driving impact in their head. That's why they're always solving for something, is there's a driving impact that they want to avoid. So whenever they go into it and they're like, well, I just think our emails are trash. I'm like, if you don't mind me asking, why do you say that? Sometimes they'll say like, well, one of the sales leaders poked their head in and said that our cold emails suck. So I'm like, okay, the thing that we're really like the current event trigger was that the VP of sales said the cold emails suck, right? So I'm like, do you happen to know what he or she mentioned? Yeah, they said they were too long, and I feel like our buyer persona is off. Why do you say that? Well, we sat down with our buyer persona committee, and we've been getting a whole bunch of emails from marketing, and marketing just doesn't feel like they know our buyer. So self-diagnosis information is important. Where it really hurts you is when it's just standalone, meaning if that's the only thing that I looked for in the call. I'm going to be so bold. It's Friday. So I'm just going to be real with y'all. When I look at 99.9, I'm going to be nice and say 99.9% repeating of the advice on LinkedIn. It is to ask for self-diagnosis information only. Ask them what the impact is. Ask them what the ripple effects are. Ask them how that affects their information or their organization. Ask them the why behind the why. Get to the why behind the why. And that's very important at the beginning. It will help you understand what the driving impact is they want to solve for, and it'll help you start to construct your diagnosis with some of the information. But without that step 2, you're in a very dangerous situation. You are banking on the fact that your buyer is correct. So I would say that 95% of the time there's a misdiagnosis in there. But 100% of the time, there's a misdiagnosis in there, meaning something that they have missed entirely. So I want y'all to jump into the chat. I know that I've been very lectury today. How many of y'all in the chat know what the average BMI is for your height and your height and gender and age? How many of you know what the average BMI body mass index is for your height, gender, and age? I want you to put in there, yes, I do know what that is, or no, I don't know what that is. How many and then second question, how many without looking it up know what the average weight range is for normal, not underweight, not overweight, for your height, age, and gender? So yes, I do know what my average BMI is. No, I don't know what my average BMI is. Kirsten said no. Oh, Robert does. Good for him. Okay, I want you to go a third question. How many of you know what the average height is for a male or female, whatever gender? Raja said no clue. For your age group. What the average height is. So for me, it'd be 38 female. What is the average height for a 38-year-old female? So we've got mostly no's in this chat. So where I'm going to challenge you is most people would say like, oh, I'm selling into a CIO. What kind of value could I add to a CIO? Or I'm selling into a CTO. What kind of value could I add to a CTO? I'm selling into a network security architect. What kind of value could I add to a network security architect? Because I'm not a network security architect. So I can tell that's Federico by the comment. Do not put that comment up on the screen, man. So you don't have to be in a role to know things about the role. Just because I'm a 38-year-old female doesn't mean that I know the average BMI. I don't. Doesn't mean I know the average weight range. I don't. Doesn't mean I know the average height. I don't. Or here's another one. What about bone density? How many of you know that, what your average bone density should be? So there's a lion's share of information that I don't know about being a human. So just because I'm a human doesn't mean I know all the facts. What's average? When's a problem being caused? You know, at what point should I be looking out for cholesterol problems? What are the signs of that? I have a human body. I have 38, years of experience having a human body, but I still don't know all the facts about that. So whenever I'm learning about my buyer, I was just Googling last night when I was walking around because I was thinking about y'all, not to get creepy on you. But we're closing out on the Sales Olympics. I'm starting to think about y'all a lot. And so I started to Google a lot of the different numbers that we've been bringing up, like gross profit margin. What's the average gross profit margin? Or what's the average NPS score? So for instance, average NPS score for B2B is 32 to 76. For B2C, it's 16 to 80. So there's a difference there. B2C is usually going to rank you lower. Average gross profit margin is going to be 5 to 10% for 5 to 10% overall. But for online retail, it's going to be 44%. For a restaurant, it's going to be 2 to 5%. And these are all very, very different and contextual to the type of business that the person has. So how I looked these up is I looked all of those statistics up within under like 3 minutes. So my push is to find out what those average statistics are so that you know the questions basically to ask to find out what those leading and leaning indicators are. But point being, and then we're going to go into lab 3, is the first 2 steps here is going to be, I'm going to uncover what they believe. What do they believe the business problem is, the root causes, the tactical problem, the current impact, persona impact, horizontal impact, vertical impact, current event trigger, future event trigger, and driving impact. They might not have all of them. They probably won't. And then the second step is I'm going to figure out what is the fact that supports that belief. And the reason that we're going to figure that out is if we're going to unhinge a certain assumption or belief, we're going to need to know why they believe it so we know what gate to unhinge it at. Okay, let's go into lab 3. No idea, Julia. Me either. I don't know what my average blood pressure is. Come on. So the lab 3, the third step in this that my sister did. So you'll remember she said, I said, I have stomach ulcers that are caused by stress. She was walk me through it. Why do you believe that? What makes you think that? I'm like, well, I had them in college and this is what they feel like. Sharp, short pain that's, it comes for 15 seconds and then it's blinding pain and then it goes away and it goes into another section of my stomach. And when I had them back in college, that was the exact same pain. The third step was she went into what she believed the diagnosis was. So she had a hint in her head that it was caffeine, but she still needed to validate that a certain amount of things were true. So she was like, can you walk me through your caffeine? Are you still drinking as much caffeine as you were previously when you were living here? And I'm like, yes, I am. And then she asked, are you still drinking Americano? Are you still drinking a Diet Monster? Are you still drinking a Diet Coke? So those 3 questions were the third step. She was diagnosing what she believed for it to be. So someone comes in, the example is someone comes in and they're like, I need cold email sales training. Like, why do you think that you need cold email sales training, if you don't mind me asking? Well, our emails are trash. I'm like, what makes you say that? I'm sure they're not that bad. Well, I was looking into the other day and I was like really confused by all the language that we were saying. Like, why are we saying this to our buyers? And I would ask the question, can you give me an example of a cold email? And so they'd pull it up. So at this point, I'm looking for the MRI. I'm looking for the data so that I can diagnose. So the third step is incredibly important. And the only thing that I should be asking for at this point is what is the raw data? What is the raw root cause? Meaning leading indicators. What is the email quality? What time of day are you sending it out? How many are you sending out per day? What's the buyer persona that you're sending it out to? Do you have DKIM, DMARC, and SPF? Are you using a sales engagement provider? How many AEs do you have? How many SDRs do you have? What is the one-to-one mapping ratio? I saw that you have a demo request process on your website. Can you walk me through a little bit of how they're being processed on the back end? What is your SQL quota? What is SQL based on? What is the no-show rate from a meeting that was booked to a meeting that was actually held? What is the qualification rate from a meeting that was held, meeting that actually hit the SQL criteria? Out of all of your AEs, what are the different acceptance rates? How quickly are they accepting those SQLs or SALs? What's the conversion into closed won? What's the ASP? What's the sales cycle? And you'll notice that I'm asking very finite points to dictate what I think the diagnosis is. I have been from an assumption perspective. Sometimes I think this person doesn't probably necessarily have a good handle on why their discovery call is going wrong. And then I get in there and they say, well, I feel like I'm not asking enough questions, or I feel like I'm cutting off the buyer, for instance. Sometimes I go in there every once in a while and their assumption is correct. Most of the time I'm like, oh, okay, you said you cut your buyer off every once in a while. You cut your buyer, which is like the classic no-no. I'm like, you cut your buyer off every single sentence that they start. And when you go in, you're not asking a question. You're just going into a monologue on basically what the product is about. So I have no assumptions really. Here's the punchline. Within this type of selling, within challenging, I've heard the advice that you need to go in with a hypothesis built. Hypothetically, that might be a good idea, hypothetically. But I never see people in practice able to let go of it. Meaning, I don't really build a hypothesis before I walk into the room. Why? Because I'm going to build the hypothesis off of the data that they're giving me. So when people come into that room with that hypothesis built, they seem to be really proud of themselves. And even when the buyer is telling them, because of this fact, and this fact, I don't believe that's true, they aren't even listening to the facts to reorder basically the hypothesis to ask themselves whether they think it's true or not. They're doubling down on what they thought beforehand, right? So in that portion, I'm going in and I'm not going in and asking questions to validate whether what I thought before is true or not. I'm going in to ask all the questions to figure out what is going on with the person. Yeah, Gianluca. It's like people come in, if they come in with an assumption or a belief or a bias, you have to keep in mind how strong confirmation bias is. Confirmation bias is, I have a static point of something that I believe in my head, and I have the reticular activation system sitting at the bottom of my brainstem that's basically encouraging my body to scour through the internet and only look at the pieces of data that stacks up into the ta-da, the voila, that my assumption is true. So I might look at a couple of pieces of information beforehand. I'm like, they're this type of company, looks like they're in hyper growth. They've hired a certain amount over the X amount of years. I'll look up their product. You go through the demo request process and just grab a couple pieces of information. But that's to sack myself with information that whenever I'm going into this diagnosis process, that I have a couple of pieces of information that I have prepped beforehand. Now, I don't know if those are going to be relevant. So my push to everyone is during this process that you are asking all the questions for the data points that you need. I am on a data crawl to get all of the data that I can that's possible to stack up into the correct diagnosis. There's an off chance that their diagnosis is 100% correct. I've never run into 100% correct diagnosis. Usually there's a misdiagnosis at minimum. But in this portion, I'm asking the questions to get the data that I need to build up into what I believe will solve the problem. So this is lap 3. But I will say, yeah, this is why I like overview questions, where I'll say something like, hey, can you walk me through how you're doing cold outbound today? The reason that I like those questions is they're going to give me a plethora of data points. Now, half of them I probably won't use, but half of them I will. So it gives me 20 different data points for the price tag of one question. So every single time you ask a question, you run the credit card. If they didn't get any value from the question, meaning they didn't learn anything new, you run the credit card double. If you should have known the answer beforehand, you run the credit card triple. And if it was a leading question, you run it 10x. So whenever I ask an overview question, it's to get the data points that I can basically construct together my own diagnosis. So usually within this process, I'm like, can you just send me over an example of your cold call? Can you send me over an example, a couple of screenshots of your cold emails? Can you share your screen and walk me through sales engagement so that I can see the cold email? So the advice that I'm going to construct together, you have to keep in mind a solution is only a solution if it actually solves the problem. So I think the lion's share behind the problem solving that we're doing today, or the discovery process we're doing today, is we're not actually keeping it in our mind that we should be accountable to solving the problem with them, as opposed to just recommending the solution. Okay, so let's go into lap 4. I only know that me and my body mass should divorce. Gianluca, I was actually thinking this yesterday. I was like, I need to go to Italy. I haven't traveled much outside of Paris, which is sad, but I just love it so much that I haven't traveled much outside of Paris since I've lived here. Okay, the 4th lap is, so the first step is you find out what they believe. The second step is you find out why they believe that, the fact that supports that belief. So my sister's like, why are you calling me? I'm like, I think I have stomach ulcers. Why do you say that? Well, in college I had stomach ulcers and they felt like this and it feels the same today. So there's the fact that supports that belief. The third step is she put together her own diagnosis. Are you still drinking a ton of caffeine? How much caffeine are you drinking in the day? Are you still drinking an Americano? Are you still drinking Diet Monster? And are you still drinking Diet Coke? I'm like, yes, 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 yes. So she's got her diagnosis. Her diagnosis is caffeine. It is stomach ulcers, but it's caused by caffeine, not stress. So the 4th piece to this, it's a very, very sweet piece, is you blow up the fact that supports the belief, not the person who believes it. So why challenging won't work if you just tell someone they're wrong is the phrase is, you are wrong, meaning the thing that's wrong is you. You're the culprit. So someone's going to attach their identity to that belief, and they're going to go into child ego state or parent ego state, and they're going to say, no, I'm not, and these are the reasons why, from an authority perspective. Or they're going to act like a little kid, and they're going to be like, And it's not because they don't necessarily believe you. It's just you hit them from the wrong psychological facet. So the thing that you blow up is not the person for being wrong. It's the fact of how they drew that assumption. That's the culprit. So it's not that they're dumb. It's not that they're bad. It's not that they're wrong. It's that they were told something, this belief, that helped them construct this diagnosis. So once they understand that this belief is the culprit, that this fact is the culprit, that this actual sentence is the culprit, that's something that's outside of them. That's something that they were taught. So whenever they know that that's incorrect, they autocorrect themselves. It's a crazy atmosphere. So she said, do you know that there are actually no medical studies that can link stomach ulcers to stress? And at that point, she didn't say, Becc, you're wrong. Becc, you're stupid for believing that. Becc, it's not that, it's this. She said, basically, the only thing that she did was she invalidated the fact that supported it. She was like, there are no medical studies that link stomach ulcers to stress. Because in her head, she was like, she believes that. She believes that these are stomach ulcers because she believes that it's stress, it's workload. So when she did that, she invalidated that fact in a very breezy fashion. I auto-corrected myself to what she believed based on the questions that she had asked me. So if someone was like, my cold email quality sucks, that's the reason for me not hitting quota. And I'm like, interesting. Okay, can you walk me through a cold email? Can I take a look at the cold email? Like, what's your open rate, if you don't mind me asking? Like, my open rate's 40%. I'm like, okay, can you walk me through this in the sales engagement? What's your reply rate? My reply rate is 0.3%. Okay, what time of day are you sending them? Oh, I'm sending them from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Like, okay, have you had an email deliverability test done? No, I haven't. Do you have DKIM and DMARC and SPF set up? No, I haven't. What's that? They're basically tests for deliverability. Have you had your domain health checked? No, I haven't. Are you sending from this primary inbox provider? No, I haven't. And you can blow up the fact that supports it. Do you know that only 59% of emails that are sent actually wind up in the primary inbox? So that's going to be the heavy hitter above quality, is that they just don't get it to their inbox, and they'll auto-correct themselves. They'll say, I think that I have an email deliverability issue. I'd be like, I think the same thing. If you go to this website and you check out blank, blank, and blank, and then you can take a look at your domain health. So again, this fourth step is, after you've constructed your diagnosis, that I'm like, I think that it's deliverability, you need to blow up the fact that supports the belief, and then they auto-correct to what your diagnosis is. Lemless for the win. We have 71 seconds left. I feel like we've covered the topic well. What questions do you have? Someone said we should not be accountable. We should not be accountable to solve. Please more deep. I'm not sure I know the question. If you could repeat the question, but if it's a question as I understand, you're asking, why should we be accountable to solve our buyers' problems? Because that's what they're trying to do. So when we're on their side, when we have the same agenda as them, when we're trying to help solve their problems just like they are, we're on the same team, right? So they can lean in and they can trust us because we have the exact same agenda. So if I'm trying to sell and you're trying to solve problems, we have opposing agendas. But if they are trying to solve their problems and we hold ourselves to that exact same bar, we'll start recommending things and not recommending things based on how effectively this helps solve the problem, which is exactly what they want in the end. That's it, y'all. So we have a surprise change. We've got one more day of this. So tomorrow, or one more day of actual content. So tomorrow, we're going to be going into event triggers. What are current event triggers? Do you want a Q&A session, Raja? Raja asked, do you want a Q&A session? Or are you going to do a Q&A session? I can field 2 questions right now if anyone has any questions. But tomorrow we're going to go into current event triggers and future event triggers. Basically, what are the things that can trigger your buyer to buy or not buy, and how does that work from I want to solve for something or I don't want to solve for something. But on Sunday, we're going to be doing always be closing ceremonies. So in that ceremony, we have a number of different surprises. There might be some medals, might be a Q&A. Raja just said that he wanted a Q&A. So we might do a Q&A. But we're definitely going to be doing some interesting things on Sunday. It's going to always be closing ceremony. So tomorrow we're going to be going into current event triggers, future event triggers. It's going to be our last day in terms of content. But on Sunday, we're going to be doing an entire, one of the pieces, we're going to be doing an entire review. So Sunday, if you want an entire review of all of the content that we've covered so far in a very snippet fashion, then that's what we're going to be doing on Sunday as a piece of it, along with some other surprises. Okay, we've got 2 questions. We have time for 2 questions, and then we're going to close out for the day. Okay, Raja said, how do you correct challenges when your prospect uses the SME shield? You don't know this industry. Yeah. Well, there's a number of different, great question, Raja. So there's a number of different shields that they're going to use. One is, can you just give me the pricing? Can you just show me the demo? And another is, I don't often hear people say outright, like, you don't know this industry, but that's what they're thinking. So I want to reorg the question, essentially. How do you correct challenges when your prospect uses shields like you don't know this industry? Well, my first question would be, is your prospect correct? You know, So if I don't know the industry, if I don't know the buyer persona, if I don't know their role, and I don't know their metrics, I don't know industry averages, I don't know what root causes, typically cause this. If I don't know anything more than what they know as a buyer, then I shouldn't be challenging at all, is my opinion. So something that I looked into yesterday when I was kind of looking up statistics is, the CrowdStrike problem happened because of a bug, a critical bug, right? So critical bug is going to be a developer's business problem. But then I got really curious. I know that IT directors, their North Star is uptime, right? So I started doing a lot of Googling of what contributes to uptime. There's a number of different things: cybersecurity attacks, cybersecurity threats, the traffic. But one of them was bugs, right? So that was actually an impact that happened to an IT director, but it happened because of the business problem of a developer. So when I was doing this researching yesterday, I was noticing, and in all cases, even when it's a buyer that I do not in any way, shape, or form understand, that the researching is much easier than I think. And it helps me understand the buyer much more quickly than I thought. I would never think that I would understand the differences between a developer, UX designer, director of product, CIO, and CTO. It's really technical, right? But a couple of Google studies later, and I know the gross profit margin for restaurants versus online retail. Online retail is 44%, 45%. Restaurants is 2 to 5%. So their main objection actually is correct in most cases. They don't think that you know anything, and most of the time sellers don't. So you have to keep in mind, they've had to research because we haven't as sellers. So when they're confirmed of that suspicion, so they've had to research, what's the best product? What's the best solution for my problem? What's the thing that I should be using, and how should I be using it, and when, where, and why I should be using it? And what are the other things that I need to use because of it? Because the sellers usually haven't done enough research on their role to understand how they can help them. So the worst thing that I can do is show up without information and then placate them by asking them to explain their decision making and their thought process and the pain in their head and the problem in their head to me, because I don't honestly deserve that. I can't add any value with that. So when they're having to give this problem and pain information, it's kind of like when a little kid, you're like, don't touch this. And they're like, why? And you're like, because I said so. The reason that answer comes out of someone's mouth is they're like, I don't have to run my logic through your logic. So the kid in that instance is challenging. They're like, I don't really believe that the reason that you have in your head is valid. So I want you to tell me the reason so I can run it through my own logic. That's where we get in a lot of trouble with our prospects, because they are 100% aware that we don't know as much as they do. So they have the leg up. They're in the role, meaning they know a lot about the role just because they're there. I'll give you a great example, and then we're going to close for the day. I have a leg up to learn French because I live in France. However, I lived here for a year and I didn't really study. So someone who wasn't living in France, who was studying 4 hours a day, let's say, or going through a curriculum course, probably would have learned it much faster than I did. So the time that I started to really learn it is when I started self-studying for 2 or 3 hours a day, combined with actually being here in France. So them having the role is their natural leg up. Them being a CIO is their equivalent of living in France, but it doesn't mean that they know everything about their role. So you have to essentially prove through, in my opinion, you're not trying to tell them anything. You're just trying to research so much so they can feel your expertise in the questions that you're asking. The reason I'm asking for the open rate is an expertise that I have, hopefully, is I know that can cause a lot of problems of email deliverability. They're not getting open. It doesn't matter the quality. And they always think that it's quality. I'm like, you're not getting an open because of email deliverability issues. So my push to everyone is I feel like with techniques, we're constantly trying to make our buyer feel like we're human, or feel like we understand them, or feel like. And I'm like, take all of that attention and just learn French, right? Study your buyer. What are the facts? What are the stats? What are the things that they most likely don't know? And in my experience, I saw this post on LinkedIn. They're like, so when someone comes in and rushes you in and asks for pricing, what do you think you should say? And one influencer said, like, oh, you should hold it back and say, I'm going to ask you some questions first, and then we can go into pricing. And then two other influencers launch at them. They're like, no, you shouldn't do that. That's sleazy. You should just give them the price, and just give them the price. Yeah, we should just give them the price. No, you shouldn't give them the price. And they're fighting back and forth online about this thing. I'm like, what's scary to me is the fact that they're asking for price right off the bat should be a huge sign to you that they know in their core that you're not an expert, that they have more expertise than you do. I'm only going to ask for the price when I really believe that you don't have more expertise than I have in the subject. So my push is through those first couple questions and those first couple lines and those first couple of minutes with your prospect, it matters what you're saying to them and what you're asking them, especially. If you can build value in those first couple of minutes, then I'm like, you know, if I have a claim to fame within discovery, I hope it's that. And this was something I analyzed after the fact. I'm like, I don't get asked for price. Near the end of the second call is where they ask for it. But we've gone all the way through discovery, and we've gone, all the way through the basically demo. I prepare a whole bunch of things in between. Now I give them some pieces of candy in between. But I believe that they're going to rush and ask for price, and they're going to be obstinate about asking for price, and they're going to rush in and ask how you compete, and they're going to be obstinate about knowing how you compete. They're going to rush in and want to see the demo right off the bat. They're going to be obstinate about seeing the demo off the bat if they believe, based on your intro questions, that you have no expertise that they don't have. So my push is to make those first couple of minutes and those first couple of questions so rich to where they believe, as they should, a very true thing, that you possess some expertise that could be helpful to them if they start to answer your questions. So all of that stuff is just a byproduct that will fall down the wayside if they believe that you have an expertise that they don't possess. Okay, that's it. How's Snowball doing, by the way? Neige de bol. That Snowball, she's doing good. I think so. I think she's doing good. My parents actually adopted another dog. My sister's dog was being really bad. This is a really sweet story. And then I promise I'll let everyone go. My the dog was being really bad. And so they were going to have to get rid of the dog. And so my oldest niece, Elliot, wrote my mom a note, a letter asking her to adopt Marley. And my mom sent Marley to boot camp first, and then she adopted Marley. So Snowball's a little tired out right now because there's another dog in the house. Anywho, that is everything. Tomorrow we are going to be going into, so that's how to challenge, find out what they believe, why they believe it, find out your diagnosis, and blow up the fact that supports it, and they'll autocorrect. Tomorrow, we're going to be going into current event triggers, what makes a buyer flex in from wanting to buy to not wanting to buy, back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. But if you can't make it tomorrow, please come on Sunday, because it's going to be the always be closing ceremonies. I actually am going to be headed to the closing ceremonies after we do the closing ceremonies on Sunday. So we're going to be doing a recap of all of the content so far, and we're going to have some special prizes. But thank you for everything today. Thank you, TJ. Good to hear from you, TJ. Thanks, Raja. Thanks, Gianluca. As always, Kirsten. As always, I'm going to be cheesy and French and say à demain, merci pour tout, et au revoir pour maintenant. Bye-bye.